Good day. Rocked by criticism of its pandemic response, the European Commission and the EU leadership are now trying to unite in a new battle against the common enemy. That common enemy is not the pandemic, even though the case count of infections across Europe is actually rising, nor is it even Russia. It is actually Britain, that country which only a year ago was still a member of the EU, but which the EU leadership cannot quite forgive for the fact that it voted and decided to leave the EU in that referendum which took place in 2016, and despite much pressure, saw through that decision and formally left the EU last year. What is happening? What is going on? Well, the pretext, or the cause, if you prefer, for this latest spat between the EU and Britain, and at the moment it's starting to look as rather more than a spat, is a decision by the British government to extend the grace period on the Irish sea border checks for British supermarkets and suppliers to adapt to new trade barriers in Northern Ireland, that part of the island of Ireland which remains a part of the United Kingdom. This is a complex story, and I think before discussing this dispute further, a little explanation is needed. When Theresa May was seeking to negotiate a deal with the European Union, a withdrawal agreement with the European Union, purportedly in order to put the Brexit decision made in the referendum in effect, she negotiated, as British Prime Minister, something called the Irish backstop with the European Union. This was a device whereby the European Union said that there had to be a completely open border between the Irish Republic and Northern Ireland, because supposedly, if that were ever threatened, that might undermine peace in Ireland. So Theresa May agreed to the backstop, whereby the British government committed itself that in the event of Brexit, as part of the withdrawal agreement, that transparent open border between Northern Ireland and the Irish Republic would continue. Now, it's important to stress that the British government has never at any point in time challenged or disputed the need to maintain an open border between the Northern Ireland and the Irish Republic. On the contrary, it has always been ready to preserve that open border and has never at any time put forward proposals to change that. The entity that has consistently said that in the absence of a backstop or some actual arrangement between the EU and Britain, that open border would cease, is none other than the EU. The argument the EU is making is that unless there were restrictions on the border between Northern Ireland and the Irish Republic, in the event that the United Kingdom were to leave the European Union without a deal, then goods and services would be able to move from Britain into the Irish Republic and therefore into the European Economic Area and the European single market without any form of restriction. And that would somehow undermine the European single market, because it would mean that goods and services would be able to enter the European single market without any restriction. Now, I first of all have to say that when the EU brought up this issue, it did strike me that it was saying and raising a topic, an issue, which it had previously discounted only a few years before. I can clearly remember when the EU negotiated an association agreement with Ukraine in 2013, which created an, in effect, open border between the EU and Ukraine. The EU ridiculed Russian objections at that time that would undermine Russia's free market policy with certain former Soviet states, including Ukraine, by allowing EU goods and services to enter that Russian free market area through the Ukrainian border without controls or checks. The EU said at that time that these Russian complaints were baseless and unwarranted, and they insisted that Ukraine should remain both a member of the Russian free trade area and enter into an association agreement with the EU, opening its borders to EU goods and services at one and the same time. The Russians, by the way, strongly objected, and this issue was a proximate cause to the geopolitical crisis in Ukraine, which continues to this day. Anyway, what was supposedly not a problem for the EU when it concerned Russia and Ukraine suddenly became a vitally important issue when it affected the EU itself and, of course, Ireland. We'll put that aside and focus on this topic more narrowly. Briefly, in my opinion, the EU had no business telling the British what sort of border regulations they should have on their own territory. The peace agreement that was negotiated by Britain, the Irish Republic, and the various parties to the conflict within Northern Ireland is a strictly British internal affair. The only external party that has a serious issue in relation to it, a serious interest in it, is of course the Irish Republic, and it negotiated its part of that agreement as a sovereign state, not as part of the EU, which incidentally some hardline Irish nationalists on both sides of the Irish border are deeply sceptical about. So the EU should not have involved itself at all in this issue. It was meddling in an issue that really did not concern it, and the true reason why it negotiated and imposed upon the British the Irish backstop was in order to try to keep Britain, the whole of Britain, inside the EU's single market, even after Britain formally quit the EU itself, on the assumption that the British would never agree to treat Northern Ireland differently for trade and customs purposes from the rest of the United Kingdom. That policy failed in the autumn of 2019, when the new British Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, who was committed to carrying out Brexit, did a deal with French President Emmanuel Macron, whereby Britain would leave the EU and would leave the European single market and the EU's customs union and other economic controls. But Northern Ireland would remain, to a certain extent, a part of the single market and part of some of these EU economic controls and areas. It was not something that the EU officials in Brussels had ever thought any British government would do. And when it was done, they were blindsided. In the event, in the year which followed, it became increasingly clear that the British themselves were deeply unhappy and sceptical about this concession that Boris Johnson made as part of his push to get Britain out of the EU with a withdrawal agreement that would pass through the British Parliament and which would complete the Brexit process. And there was even a brief point last year when the British government was actually seriously considering passing British legislation which would undo this concession that first Theresa May and then Boris Johnson had been persuaded by the EU Commission to make. However, and in the end, Boris Johnson did get a deal on Britain's separation from the EU's economic structures done, which continued to preserve some of the arrangements of the Irish backstop by keeping Northern Ireland for some purposes in the EU's economic area and in its single market. What the EU is now complaining about is that the British, by sending food to British supermarkets in Northern Ireland, is going against that agreement, that provision, which is, by the way, called the Northern Ireland Protocol, which keeps Northern Ireland to some extent within the EU's single market and its economic area. Supposedly, this step that the British government is taking to help British supermarket chains in Northern Ireland is some sort of massive attack against the agreement that Boris Johnson negotiated only a few weeks ago and which led to Britain leaving the European economic structures and single market just a short time ago. In fact, the reaction in Brussels has been absolutely furious, and the EU Commission is now threatening to take Britain to court, possibly even the European Court of Justice, and is talking about raising this issue in the arbitration mechanism which exists between Britain and the EU, which is supposed to iron out any difficulties. I have to say that all of this looks to me wildly and ludicrously overblown. The British government is not saying that it will go completely back on the backstop and protocol agreements over Northern Ireland. It's simply extending a grace period that was supposed to expire at the end of this month, that's to say at the end of March, until October, to help British supermarkets and certain British businesses sort out their problems in more time. That's hardly likely to threaten the entire European single market in any significant way. To me, frankly, this all looks like another device to unite Europe against Britain and at the same time to punish Britain for daring to leave the EU. This overblown affair looks increasingly like it's going to spiral out of control. There seems to be no desire in Brussels to negotiate this problem and resolve it in a friendly way. Now, that certainly could have happened. I mean, there could have been discussions between the EU and the British. The EU could have said, look, we're not particularly happy that you're doing this. We do regard this as an infringement of the agreement that was reached, but we understand that you have problems. we're prepared to negotiate and be flexible. If you want to send food to British supermarkets, well, we'll see what we can do to enable that to happen. And maybe you can't go on doing it all the way until October, but we'll see what we can do to help tide you over until then. Instead, all these threats of legal action and the rest, and by the way, also it now turns out of rescinding the economic agreement that Boris Johnson negotiated with the EU just a few weeks ago, and of imposing tariff restrictions on the British, all of that seems to be way overblown and completely disproportionate, and suggests an EU Commission that remains deeply resentful of the fact that Britain quit the EU and quit the EU successfully, and which remains also almost certainly deeply resentful of the way in which Britain has shown itself to be so much more successful in the medication rollouts to combat the pandemic over the last few weeks. I would add that all these threats the EU is making are also hollow. If the EU Commission is foolish enough to take this case against the British to the European Court of Justice, it will almost certainly face criticism within the European Court of Justice that its response to this infringement is disproportionate. Perhaps minor payments from Britain to cover this infringement would have been the right way, certainly not threats to rescind tariff agreements on trade in goods on a far bigger scale than which is what was agreed just a few weeks ago. So it's also the case, in my opinion, that all of these threats that the EU Commission is making will ultimately run into opposition from the most powerful player within the EU, which is Germany. It became very clear towards the end of last year that the German government was not willing to see a complete no-deal Brexit outcome between the EU and Britain take place, because that would have threatened German exports to Britain of such products as German cars. So the German government will almost certainly at some point step in and tell the EU Commission to cool down and to start behaving in a more responsible way, and not to raise the stakes on such a fundamentally minor and technical issue in a way that could throw the entire deal between Britain and the EU into jeopardy, thus jeopardizing Germany's highly profitable exports to Britain along the way. To my mind, what this shows again is how ultimately unserious the people who run the EU and certainly at the Commission level have now become. Instead of accepting that when two large economic blocs, Britain and the EU, carry out a divorce, certain teething problems are inevitable, and that these can be sorted out with a modicum of goodwill and good faith negotiations. Whenever one of these teething problems comes up, they throw a hissy fit and start spluttering with rage, threaten to rescind tariffs, and talk wildly about legal action. That does not make a good impression, not just in Britain itself, and certainly in Northern Ireland, but it also does not make a good impression internationally. Other countries which forge trade agreements with the EU, and of course both the United States and China are in the throes of complex negotiations on trade with the EU at various times, are going to say to themselves, well, if the EU throws a fit over such a minor issue, can it ultimately be relied upon to behave as a responsible and a reliable partner in any agreements we reach with them? Indeed, if issues of unreliability on the part of the EU start to arise, it might just happen that a few people around the world will remember Sergei Lavrov's comments at the press conference he had last month in Moscow with EU High Representatives on Foreign Affairs, Josep Borrell, in which Lavrov said that the EU is an unreliable partner. Ultimately, leading a major economic bloc, like leading a country, is a serious matter. One expects people in charge of such countries and economic blocs to behave in an adult and responsible way. It's quite clear that the people in charge in Brussels are, in that respect, neither very adult nor very responsible, but behave instead like spoiled teenagers who throw a tantrum whenever anything happens that they don't like. Thank you very much for joining me for this program. Please also check out not just this channel and the next programs that I will do here, but also the various other programs that I do with my colleague and friend Alex Christoforou on our main channel, the Duran, and also please check out Alex's channel and also our other channel where we show the various interactions we have with viewers on our live streams. You find links under this video. Please also check us out on our other platforms, BitChute, Library, Rumble, and especially Odyssey, which is an exceptional platform that provides a wonderful service. You find links under this video also. And please, if you want to support the Duran, you can do so by through Patreon, PayPal, Subscribestar, and via Bitcoin and other such currencies. You find links about how to do that under this video also. Lastly, check out our shop, the wonderful things you will find there. You will notice that I'm wearing a Duran hoodie because this is a damp and cold day in London, and this is exactly the item one needs to wear in order to stay warm on such a day. But you'll also find our wonderful Duran t-shirts there, long-sleeved and short-sleeved, 100% cotton, our famous magic mugs, our hats, and our sweatshirts also. And I look forward to you joining me on my next program on this channel, and have a wonderful day until then. Thank you.